This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. The video game industry is incredibly disposable. Often unbelievably disposable, considering the amount of time, money, and effort that is poured into a massive project that may keep someone busy for a few years or a few months, or not even get far off the ground. It's a cutthroat world at times, and especially recently there's a growing trend of game developers or studios being shut down or absorbed as part of a larger network as a business move. However, this ain't a business channel, so I want to focus on studios that were shut down because they made a game that didn't quite work out, and so the only logical decision was to shut the doors on the whole operation. Mildly depressing, with room to get even sadder, but perhaps there's a few cautionary tales in here somewhere. Life is short, and even shorter when there's money to be made. Chasing trends is typically a recipe for catastrophic failure. Not because you can't have success doing so, but more so because there's a risk of your creation becoming overshadowed by more prominent games that help to create the trend in the first place. Few developers have tumbled into this trap quite as badly as Boss Key Productions, who only made 2 video games but had a stint in the industry that lasted 4 disappointing years. They were founded by Cliff Bleszinski, who worked on Gears of War, and Ian Brussy of Killzone fame, and I think the idea was to use all their experience to strike it big with new IPs for their indie studio. Unfortunately, the 2 games they made were unbelievably derivative and so far behind the competition that they were practically dead on arrival, with the second one literally being dead on arrival. Back when Lawbreakers was being made, there was a lot of optimism that Cliffy B and RGB could bring something new to the multiplayer shooter genre, that Overwatch and Destiny and CSGO and Call of Duty and Halo and literally like 20 other franchises hadn't discovered yet, and rather inevitably, Lawbreakers wasn't a fraction as unique as the devs thought it was. Fun and fast-paced, and on its own, not a bad game in the slightest, but when you're trying to create a new studio from scratch, you desperately need to be starting from a strong position, and this just wasn't it. Lawbreakers reviewed okay, but sold very poorly, and with little return on the investment, the closure of Boss Key Productions was already underway. There was an attempt to sail against the wind with Radical Heights, a quirky game show themed battle royale, but again, it's chasing a trend that it is so far behind the pace for. Radical Heights did gain some traction on Steam for being free to play, but since it came out as people were packing up their desks at Boss Key, it's too underdeveloped to warrant spending any significant time on. Sometimes original ideas is all it takes. Just gonna spend a bit more time brainstorming ideas and less time comparing your new game to your competitors and Dark Souls. It's like you didn't even try. Hey guys, real quick, my channel has been approved for YouTube memberships now, so if you fancy supporting my channel more directly, you can become a member for as little as £1 a month and gain access to some nifty perks, as well as being featured on my channel page. Hit the join button below this video if that sounds cool to you. Thank you, and let's get back to the video. The challenge for a lot of defunct studios is working out which game was holding the knife when the studio died. Sometimes a closure can happen after a series of failures, and sometimes the writing can be on the wall from a previous mistake that a better game can't save. And with Silicon Knights, I don't think you can narrow it down to just the one video game. If that name sounds familiar to you, it will likely be because of their brilliant stint on the Nintendo GameCube, where they brought Eternal Darkness to life and worked with Konami to create the sometimes good Metal Gear Solid remake. Yeah, I know Twin Snakes had its issues, but it helped to build up enough goodwill for Silicon Knights and gave them a good platform to go away and make something new and exciting. 2008 saw Too Human come out, the start of what was meant to be a trilogy, but if you've heard of Too Human, you likely know why that never happened. But actually, there's a lot more to Silicon Knights' decline than a game that didn't go so well. Too Human definitely didn't help, and actually you can probably lay some of the blame at X-Men Destiny for finally driving the nail in, but Too Human especially went through development hell and had a decent amount of money pumped into it, so the fact that it turned out so mediocre couldn't have helped in the slightest. Instead, the chunky torpedo that sunk Silicon Knights was the lawsuit they filed against Epic Games in 2007 that claimed that Epic's Unreal Engine 3 wasn't adequately supported by Epic. In a spectacular reverse Uno move, Epic Games successfully countersued Silicon for copyright infringement, fleecing them for $4.5 million and forcing them to recall and destroy all unsold copies of their Unreal Engine games, which include Too Human and X-Men Destiny. Both games didn't sell well, and I don't know how much of that is down to the games not being great, or there not being enough stock left to make money. Either way, no chance for Silicon Knights after losing the lawsuit. Be careful who you sue, kids! So corporate mismanagement is a surefire way to pack up a studio early, but let's forget all of that and instead discuss what the fuck went wrong with 38 Studios. I don't actually know a lot about these guys other than the fact that they were behind Kingdoms of Amalur and how I owned that game from a Steam summer sale one year, but I'm glad I made this video for the sole reason of allowing me to research this company, because holy shit, it is a ride to say the least. Let's start with Kingdoms of Amalur though, because it's worth underlining just how good this game was, emphasized by THQ Nordic buying the rights and remastering the game in 2020. Back in 2012 though, and despite a positive reception and decent sales figures, Kingdoms of Amalur was the only game that 38 Studios were responsible for, and 3 months after its release they declared bankruptcy and became defunct not long after. So what the hell happened here? Well, it's kind of wild, but 38 Studios was founded by Curt Schilling, who the internet says played Major League Baseball for the best part of 20 years, and after retiring, he fancied a crack at founding a video game company. He wanted to create an MMORPG since he liked playing those, and soon got to task of hiring some clever people who could hopefully, probably, make this happen. 4 years later and nothing had happened, so 38 Studios were granted a $75 million loan from the state of Rhode Island to help create their game and also to come move to Rhode Island and create some jobs or something. At this point, 38 Studios started creating Kingdoms of Amalur, which you may have noticed isn't an MMORPG BBQ, and that's because they were simultaneously working on this and a game with the codename Copernicus, which would be their big online multiplayer experience. Ultimately, 38 Studios took on too much and stretched themselves too thin, and when they defaulted on a loan payment, the end was nigh. That money they got from the state of Rhode Island, a lot of it was taxpayer money, so yeah, that's good. Kingdoms of Amalur escaped mostly unscathed, but employees at 38 Studios only began being paid their missing wages as recently as 2021. And Curt Schilling? Well, his $50 million net worth was eroded to roughly $1 million. Can't say he didn't pay his dues on this one. If there's a lesson to be learned from 38 Studios, it will probably be that with enough bad decisions, you can shut down any lineup of talented people. Ion Storm may have Deus Ex to their name, one of the best games ever made, and a game that was so far ahead of its time that we're only just catching up to some of its features now, but in that same year they also made Darkatana, one of the most miserable games I've ever had the misfortune of playing. Ion Storm started out a bit like Boss Key did, with the allure of big names having full creator control, but Ion Storm was far more exciting a concept, and when you got the likes of Warren Spector from Ultima and Wing Commander fame, and John Romero, who was so instrumental in helping to create Wolfenstein and Quake and Doom, that's an insane dream team. Well, Deus Ex has Warren Spector's name all over it, and Darkatana has Romero's name plastered everywhere, so just saying it's not a good look. The best thing I can say about Darkatana is that it's something new, and given what I've talked about so far, that is a minuscule positive. Unfortunately, Darkatana was so poorly thought out and dripping in terrible game design that no amount of marketing or big names could have saved it. In fact, infamously, the big names in marketing probably did even more damage, since John Romero didn't make any prospective consumers his bitch, and instead, Darkatana only sold about 40,000 copies and is still one of the biggest commercial failures in the history of the video game industry. It suffered from delays due to switching the entire game over to a new engine 6 months into development, and a combination of fan frustration with these delays and its overly confident marketing set Darkatana up for a spectacular fall. Key members of Ion Storm would leave in the years that followed, and once they fulfilled their 6-game contract with Eidos Entertainment, both branches of Ion Storm shut down for good. Kind of insane that one company can be responsible for both one of the worst games ever made, and also one of the best games ever made in the same year. Goes to show that there were talented people at Ion Storm, but a lot of stupid decisions floating around as well. Suck it down indeed. For a little bit of variety, I want to end this video by talking about a game that, under different circumstances, would never be responsible for closing a studio, and actually, even now, isn't directly the reason why. LA Noire is an awesome game that, despite being 12 years old now, could have come out yesterday. Interestingly, if you Google LA Noire, the first result is a link to Rockstar Games' website, despite the fact that Rockstar only published the game. And that's because the developers Team Bondi from Australia shut down shortly after releasing their one game, LA Noire. But hold on, you might be thinking, didn't this game do incredibly well for itself and win a bunch of awards and sell a ton of copies? Under what circumstances can a game do incredibly well and yet not be enough to save its developers? I seriously doubt that. Honestly, you could make LA Noire again with things done slightly differently, and it likely wouldn't have been Team Bondi's only game. The short version of this story is that after releasing LA Noire, Bondi were unable to sign a publishing deal with anyone in the industry, and ran out of money very quickly after. Which may sound incredibly unfortunate and the sort of situation where you'd throw them a deal out of charity, but the long version of the story reveals a few issues behind the scenes. LA Noire's development was grueling, and yeah, I know that it took 7 years to make and that's probably a given, but anecdotes from people who worked on the game read more like horror stories than the whimsical profession that we all grow up wanting to do when we're older. The managerial style of the senior staff was horrible, with very high staff turnover and brutal 12-hour workdays, and you realise that Team Bondi were crunching their way through a 7-year dev cycle for their one and only game. So it's not like they had foolishly come to the conclusion that crunch was necessary after years of experience in the industry. They just mismanaged the shit out of a complicated video game and almost created an amazing game in spite of horrific working conditions. Rockstar kicked these clowns to the curb as soon as possible, and oh yeah, Bondi were unable to sign a publishing deal after LA Noire because all of this abuse became very public and no one wanted to work with them. Can't make games if people don't want to work with you or for you. Doesn't matter if the game is amazing or sells well, some things are more important. And with that, those are the studios that were shut down by video games. Do you agree, or is there another game that is more deserving of number one? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. If you need something else to watch right now, I ranked every Mario Party game last week, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including AJ887, Scott Riker, and Devon Hutt. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.